Hello, my name is Richard Bentley. I am a pastor in the California Pacific Annual Conference, which worships in 15 languages every Sunday. I am now retired, but I did spend 40 years serving a variety of congregations, many of which were racial ethnic congregations or worshiped in 2 languages. So, I have been working in the area of I've been working with what we now call the Global Relationships team of the Love Your Neighbor Coalition since we started in about 2012. In 2008 General Conference, I was doing a network strategy where I was trying to work with delegates who knew delegates who knew delegates, and I discovered that I couldn't find any delegates in the U.S. who knew delegates outside the U.S., and that was a problem. Eventually we were able to accomplish our goal because I personally knew Filipinos and we reached the Filipinos, but it wasn't through US delegates. And so that started the whole sense of we want to build bridges and build connections with leaders in central conferences, both in Africa and the Philippines, since that's where the growth in the United Methodist Church is happening. And so I've been working on that project in a variety of different ways since 2012. As a result of some of that, the Christmas Covenant team formed in 2019, shortly after the St. Louis General Conference, and began to talk about how we would create a Methodist church that was less top down and less one size fits all, that had values of equity, and we developed, I would think I was the only person born in the United States who was on the team at that point. And we talked about the values we wanted to affirm, and then we wrote the Christmas Covenant, particularly the constitutional amendments, to the specification of those values. And at the time, we were a group of mostly leaders in Africa and the Philippines, and a few people in North America, but mostly, even the North Americans were mostly from outside the US. We had no official standing, and we, I think, came up with the 22nd plan on how to reorganize the United Methodist Church. And most people just thought we were this, it's hard to explain what people thought. They were like, well, that's interesting. And then we would go on and talk about something else, and then we talked about the need for constitutional amendments. And it's like, well, you can't pass constitutional amendments. So fast forward 5 years later, and the standing committee basically picked up what the work we had done, modified it a little bit, and it passed the constitutional amendments, which were supposed to be impossible to passed with a 78% vote. I guess it should say along the line, after we wrote the Christmas Covenant in 2020, we continued to meet monthly by Zoom, and we continued to talk about how we do educational work in Africa and the Philippines to build support for the Christmas Covenant. And I think part of what makes it different is we're used to developing plans in the US and then going and saying why people outside the US should do them. This was a plan developed outside the US that we then had to convince everybody else was a valid plan. Very different approach. And so, for example, the comms person for the Christmas Covenant is located in Zimbabwe. So just a different way of looking at the world and reality. Hopefully, regionalization will allow the 8 regions of the United Methodist Church, of which the U.S. will now be a region, to develop to do a lot of work based on their unique regional context. And this is a lot more widespread than people think. It gets into worship, ordination standards, hymns, I mean, it's just all kinds of ways. We currently have a book of discipline that's very US-centric, and consequently, a lot of the Methodist Church, half of the Methodist Church, which is outside of the US, sort of adapts it, whether they can or they can't, to make it work. So it will be exciting to see what happens next. The next step is, of course, ratification in the annual conferences. We need to get a 2/3 aggregate vote. So show up at your annual conference and vote. And hopefully in a year or two, we'll know whether the final step has happened.